I want to start today by asking you to check in on something. A specific feeling. It's one I think a lot of us have, but we don't really have the words for it. You know that feeling when your mind isn't just thinking, when it stops feeling like a workspace and starts to feel more like a pressurized cabin?
That's a very specific, and I have to say, a slightly claustrophobic image to start with.
It is, but stick with me.
Yeah.
I'm talking about when thoughts stop being these sort of, floaty suggestions like, oh, maybe I should do the laundry, and they start feeling like commands.
Directives.
Yes, directives.
Yeah.
They have weight, they have mass, and honestly, they have velocity.
Velocity is the perfect word. You're describing that shift from just, simple cognition to, let's call it propulsion. When a thought isn't just there, it's driving you. And that is exactly where we're starting today. We're doing a deep dive into this fascinating and kind of beautiful essay by the writer and philosopher Pedro Malha. It has a title that I guarantee you will not guess.
It's called spinworms.
Spinworms.
I know, it sounds like a gardening accident.
Yeah.
Or a really obscure indie band.
It does, but by the end of this, that phrase might actually save your sanity, or at the very least, explain how you've managed to survive this long. Mala is writing about a time in his life where his own mind became, well, dangerous to him. He talks about his internal safety failing, and he realized, and this is the key insight right at the top, he realized, if I did not build something inside my own mind, nothing external would do it for me.
Wow. That's the stop the car moment for me. The realization that, the cavalry isn't coming. You have to build the fortress yourself.
Exactly. But what makes Mala's work so unique is that he gives us the blueprints for that fortress. He didn't use clinical terms like CBT or reframing. He built a function, a specific mental architecture, and he calls it the spinworms.
Okay, so let's decode that metaphor before we get into the mechanics. Why spin and why worms? Because to me, worms imply, I don't know, decomposition.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the most comforting image.
It's actually the opposite here. Think about the ground. When you walk on the same patch of dirt over and over, what happens to it?
It's compacted, hard as a rock. You can't dig into it.
Right. Malha describes his mind during that period as compacted ground, rigid, dense. Nothing could grow, and more importantly, nothing could move through it. A thought would just land and sit there, heavy, immovable.
Okay, I'm with you.
So what do worms do in soil? They don't destroy it. They aerate it. They twist. They burrow. They find a path through all that density by working the soil from the inside. They create space.
So the worms are the mechanism for creating space in a mind that's become too solid.
Precisely. He imagined them as this friendly internal crew, almost like bookworms, moving quietly through the pages of his thoughts. And their job wasn't to fight the thoughts. That's a key distinction. You don't fight the dirt. You just create a little wiggle room.
And the spin part.
That's the texture. He needed to spin these hard, jagged, absolute thoughts into something softer, like spinning wool. You take this raw, scratchy material and you spin it into a thread that's manageable, something you can actually work with.
I like that. It's less about positive thinking, which I think we're all a bit allergic to at this point,
Absolutely.
and more about textural engineering.
That's a great way to put it, textural engineering. And the reason he needed this crew wasn't just to feel better. It was to stop one very specific force, momentum.
Momentum.
Okay.
Okay, talk to me about that, because usually we think of momentum as a good thing, like I've got momentum on this project.
But in the context of anxiety or trauma, momentum is the enemy. Mala points out that a dark or heavy thought, it tends to harden into certainty, and once your brain says this bad thing is definitely happening, it accelerates.
It starts collecting evidence.
It collects evidence, it gathers speed, and it becomes a runaway train. The spinworms were designed to basically throw themselves on the tracks, to interrupt that acceleration before it becomes a crash.
Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts. How does a metaphorical worm stop a train? What does this actually look like in practice?
It works by changing the grammar of the thought. This is where it gets really technical, but it's fascinating.
Right.
Malha says his thoughts during that time were absolutes.
Give me an example of an absolute.
This pain is never going to end.
Oof. Yeah, that feels final. It feels like a verdict.
It implies permanence. So that's a heavy, fast thought. The spinworms would get to work. Now notice what they don't do. They don't try to lie and say, this is great, life is beautiful, because your brain would just reject that.
Right, the brain isn't stupid. It knows when you're gaslighting yourself.
Exactly. So instead, the worms spin the grammar from permanent to temporary. They change, this is never going to end, to this is happening right now, but I do not know the future.
That's so subtle. It's almost legalistic.
It is. But it breaks the lock. It introduces doubt into the doom. Or if a thought implied certainty like, I am unsafe, the worms spin it into a conditional. I feel unsafe in this moment, but I am in a locked room.
So you're moving the thought from a command to a proposition.
You're just taking the sharp edge off. Malha calls it damage reduction. He's very honest about this. He says the system wasn't flawless. Sometimes a thought would outrun the worms. The momentum was just too strong.
But the goal wasn't risk elimination. It was just to keep the structure standing.
It buys you time. And in a crisis, time is everything.
Which brings us to the second layer of this architecture. We've talked about the internal stuff bubbling up, the inside job, so to speak. But Mala also talks about the worms working at the gates.
The gates of attention.
Exactly. Because the world is loud, and if your internal ground is already compacted, the outside world just feels like an assault. I think anyone who's opened a news app in the last 5 years knows this feeling.
Absolutely. Malha focuses on how this crew managed external triggers. Let's stick with the news example. We all know this feeling. A report comes on about some terrible violence or global instability.
And your stomach just drops before the anchor even finishes the sentence.
That's your nervous system hijacking your logic. Malha says for him, the spin worms would intervene to narrow the frame.
Narrow the frame. Unpack that for me.
When you see a global tragedy, a traumatized mind wants to make it personal. It wants to collapse the distance. It says, the world is unsafe, therefore I am unsafe right now in my living room.
It collapses the distance between over there and right here.
Exactly. It makes the global local. So the spin worms step in to spin that signal back to its proper scale. They'd remind him, the world contains that tragedy, but my home does not.
My home does not.
It's a boundary. It doesn't deny the tragedy. That would be delusion. It just prevents the tragedy from invading his immediate physical space. It keeps the event where it belongs, which is outside the gate.
He gives another example that's even more relatable, I think. The late child scenario.
The classic anxiety spiral.
Yes. You look at the clock. They should be home. They aren't. And instantly, your brain starts writing the script for a horror movie.
That's the momentum again. The mind assembles a story of danger based on zero evidence. It fills the gaps with catastrophe. They crashed. They're hurt. Something terrible happened.
And Mala says the spinworms would move before that story even gained detail.
They spun the spark into something proportionate. Late does not automatically become danger.
There's a quote here I highlighted. Imagination did not outrun fact.
That's the core of it. Anxiety is just imagination moving faster than reality. The spinworms are the tether. They pull the imagination back to the pace of the facts. The fact is, they are late. That's the only fact we have.
It works for relationships, too. A careless comment from a friend. In a fragile state, that feels like a verdict on your soul. They hate me. I'm unlovable.
And the worms spin it. This is a comment. It is material that can be worked. It is not a command.
I have to say, though, as we're talking about this, it sounds incredibly effective, but it also sounds exhausting.
You've hit on the hidden cost, and
Sure.
Malha devotes a whole section of the essay to this. He calls it the fatigue of vigilance.
Because you're essentially running a 24/7 security operation in your own head. You're the bouncer at the club of your own mind.
Well, imagine having a security team in the lobby of your building. Are you safer? Yes. But can you ever fully relax? No. Because the very presence of the security team is a constant reminder that there is a threat.
There's a background hum of scanning.
He describes it not as physical exhaustion, but as a narrowing of life. This is the part that really struck me. He says when you live with spinworms, spontaneity feels dangerous.
Spontaneity can feel provisional. Rest can feel conditional.
That hits hard, because if you let your mind wander, it might wander into a dark alley. So you keep it on a leash. You are always on duty. You can never just be.
So the spinworms make the world survivable, but they don't make it light.
Exactly. They keep you alive, but they keep you heavy. And I think that validates the experience of so many people with high-functioning anxiety. You're functioning, you're spinning everything successfully, you're showing up, you're paying the bills, but you are tired deep in your bones.
Because you're doing invisible labor.
Constant, invisible engineering. Every conversation, every news alert, every idle thought is being worked by the worms. That costs energy.
But the essay doesn't end there. And I'm glad, because if the conclusion was, life is hard, keep spinning, I'd be pretty depressed right now. But there's an evolution.
There is. In recent years, Mala noticed the worms were needed less. And this introduces a new concept, one that I find fascinating. Pass through.
Pass through. How is that different from spinning?
It's the difference between fighting a fire and just not lighting the match. Or better yet, realizing there's no fire. Spin is engagement. You take a thought, you wrestle with it, you modify it. Pass through is non-engagement.
So back to the news example. Spin is, the world is bad, but I am safe. What's pass through?
Pass through is, the news starts, and you just change the channel.
You just don't let it in.
Pass through is non-admission. If an old, dark sentence starts to form in his head, he doesn't argue with it. He doesn't fix the grammar. He doesn't complete the sentence. He lets it drift away.
That sounds like nirvana compared to the worms. It sounds like peace. But it raises a huge question. Why couldn't he just do that from the beginning? Why can't we all just let things go?
This is the most critical point of the entire deep dive. If you take one thing away today, let it be this. Pass-through is only possible when the system no longer experiences every signal as an immediate threat.
So you can't ignore a signal if your brain thinks it's a tiger in the bushes.
Exactly. If you are in a state of high threat, if your nervous system is fried, if you are in trauma, you must assess everything. Your biology demands it. You can't just let it pass because your survival instinct is screaming that it might kill you.
So pass-through isn't a moral upgrade. It's not that he became a better meditator.
No, it's that he became safer. His environment, internal and external, became safer. It's a reduction in labor because the threat level went down.
I find that incredibly validating because people judge themselves so harshly for overthinking. They think, why am I like this? Why can't I just be chill?
And Malha is answering, because you don't feel safe yet. And that's okay. Use the worms.
Use the worms until the ground softens.
Right. You cannot force pass-through. If you try to force Zen on a traumatized mind, you're just going to create more repression. You need the worms first. You need the architecture. You have to build the safety before you can enjoy the view.
Malha actually addresses the reader directly about this. It's a beautiful passage. He writes, if you have ever built something inside yourself to stay here, I see you.
If you have ever narrowed a frame before it overwhelmed you, I see you. He calls it silent architecture.
I love that framing. We usually see these coping mechanisms, the vigilance, the spinning, as symptoms of sickness. Oh, I have anxiety, I'm broken. Malha reframes them as evidence of intelligence.
It's adaptive intelligence. It's not weakness. It's engineering. You built a crew to keep you alive when the pressure was crushing you. That is a feat of strength, even if it was built in silence where no one else could see it.
And he still has them, right? He didn't fire the crew.
No, and that's the point. They're still part of the structure. He says the worms didn't die. When things get unsafe, because life does get unsafe, the spin worms wake up, they spin. And when it's safe again, they rest. And he uses pass-through.
It breathes. It stiffens when it needs to protect, and it softens when it can conserve energy.
Which is really the true definition of resilience, isn't it? Resilience isn't being hard as a rock all the time. That's just brittleness. That breaks. Resilience is adaptability. It's having a system that responds to the load.
You know, what I find so comforting about this is that it takes the morality out of mental health. It's not about being good at life. It's about having a working crew.
And acknowledging that the crew is loyal. He calls them his friendly, diligent internal crew. Even though they caused him fatigue, he recognizes their loyalty. They kept him here. They did the work.
So as we wrap up, I'm thinking about you listening to this. Maybe you don't call them spin worms. Maybe that's too weird. Maybe you call them manager or just anxiety.
But if you recognize the mechanics, that feeling of catching a thought before it hardens or talking yourself down from a ledge of panic, then you have this architecture too.
And the takeaway here isn't just try to relax. It's to respect the work you've already done.
Yes. Respect the engineering. If you are exhausted, it's because you've been doing heavy lifting in invisible gravity. And the hope here is that eventually the ground softens, the density breaks up, and you don't have to spin everything anymore.
But until then,
Trust the worms.
Yeah.
Let them do their job. Don't fight the crew that's trying to save you.
Much of what we call strength is architecture built in silence. That is going to stick with me.
It's a perspective shift we all need.
Thank you for walking us through this one. This was, well, it was a spin, but the good kind.
The best kind.
To everyone listening, take care of your internal crew today. They're working hard for you. We'll see you on the next deep dive.